When I was younger, I'd often stare out the car window and watch the world whip by, never paying too much attention to the things around me. Rarely would I stop and look to smell the flowers, to enjoy the color of the leaves, or to take in the warmth of the sun. I would never experience anything profound or deep on a daily basis in my life, unless it absolutely shook the world of myself or those close to me. And even then, trying to describe the experiences or feelings in me by the spoken or written word felt woefully inadequate. Quite frankly, I don't have the words to describe how things are going for me in the present. Perhaps the best way I could describe my feelings would be to borrow words from one of my favorite essays. Experiencing reality deeply, and feeling that it is profound. Today, I'd like you to take a journey down memory lane with me, back to January 15th, 2013. January 15th, 2013 was a normal day, all things considered. I went to another ordinary day of school, played some video games, and did homework all while feeling the cold in my feet and being nagged to put on more clothes by my parents. And then I saw it. In my YouTube feed, there was this live stream of a show called Metadating by the channel Geek and Sundry. In the show, 3 hosts explored how various genres of video games depicted and explored romance. That day, January 15th, 2013, happened to be my first encounter with Katawa Shoujo. At the time, my innocent mind was fixated by the humor and the romance of the route they were playing. I've always been a romantic at heart, and playing a game that seemed to be a romantic comedy was certainly what I was interested in at the time, and still am, I might add. Even to this day, it's difficult for me to talk about Katawa Shoujo to people in my life. I think there's a certain stigma to those who know the general nature of visual novels, as they are often associated with the term dating sim. And the idea of a visual novel is strange to most people, especially one that has adult content in certain scenes. I still clearly remember witnessing my first explicit scene on my first route, and closing the application almost immediately before returning to it at a later time despite the discomfort I felt. A visual novel, sometimes abbreviated as VN, is an interactive game genre which originated in Japan, featuring text-based story with a narrative style of literature and interactivity aided by static or sprite-based visuals, most often using anime-style art or occasionally live-action stills and sometimes video footage. Trying to explain the idea of a visual novel with the overarching setting of pursuing disabled girls always put my head in a quandary, and I never knew how to go about it. Suffice it to say, I got much more than I bargained for, especially to still be thinking about it nearly a decade later. Much has been said about Katawa Shoujo and those it inspired. During its peak in popularity in the year 2012, numerous folks on the internet took up things like running, drawing, and writing. They were inspired to be better, to grow, and to improve themselves. While debates about its quality still occasionally occur from time to time, it's difficult to argue that it didn't have an impact. You need only look at the Katawa Shoujo Reddit or numerous videos and comments on YouTube to understand that it had a tremendous impact on an innumerable amount of people, myself included. When I read Katawa Shoujo for the first time, I didn't understand what was being said, or the depths of the reflections that I ought to have had. After all, I had gone into it thinking the stories would just be romantic comedies. At the end of it all, I just had this strange feeling in me. I wanted to be a better person, to treat others with kindness, to improve myself, and to live each day to the fullest. Reading Katawa Shoujo and its 5 routes again in my senior year of college didn't dampen those strange feelings whatsoever. If anything, it only intensified them. All I discovered was this desire for adequate words to describe this feeling. The author of one of my favorite Katawa Shoujo essays, Auric-Orange, explained the main reason why Katawa Shoujo resonated with so many. The emotion whose name you do not know. Elevation, or kamamuta, which means moved by love. Auric-Orange describes the feeling in this way. Elevation is the emotion you feel when you see a relationship suddenly intensify, like when 2 people finally become a couple, or are reunited after years apart. It often feels like warmth in the chest, moist eyes, tears, a lump in your throat, the chills, or feelings of buoyancy. But the most powerful form of elevation comes from watching somebody selflessly reach down to pick up someone in the absolute depth of self-loathing or despair. That on a surface level, yes, the visual novel is about disabilities. But truthfully, the many people, myself included, who fondly recall its 5 routes in various moments are fixated on this emotion. This fuzzy feeling inside of us. This emotion whose name we do not know. Elevation. I've been creating these video essays because of elevation. Yet, in all my years of life, I have never felt more elevation than when I have read Katawa Shoujo and people's experiences with it. Why they still think of it today, and why it holds a special place in their hearts too. While the history of Katawa Shoujo has been extensively covered, I would like at the very least to cover a few quick basics in its development. The idea was originally conceived in December of 2000 by a Japanese artist named Raita, but truly took off in January of 2007 when the sketches were extensively discussed on 4chan. From there, a team was assembled from various internet communities and development took several years, leading to its official full release in January of 2012. As emotional of a roller coaster as it tends to be on its different routes, the very premise of it is often enough to develop a significant amount of intrigue for a prospective reader. On a snowy day in winter, a Japanese high schooler named Hisao Nakai is asked out on a date by his crush, only for the classic beating heart often portrayed in romance to actually result in a heart attack. In the subsequent scenes, the reader is cued into several important details leading to the start of the actual story. He has been diagnosed with a severe medical condition and arrhythmia. His friends, classmates, and crush abandon him in the hospital over a period of time. And the hospital and the abyss of his mind become a prison where he begins to lose track of his past self and any semblance of his present. The only real conclusion he seems to come to is that his future and the dreams that he once held, for all intents and purposes, are dead and will never come back. Hisao has his heart broken, both literally and figuratively. That is, of course, until one fateful day, where he's offered the opportunity to transfer schools to Yamaku Academy, a school specifically for the disabled. Having no real choice, Hisao begrudgingly agrees. And when he finally reaches the gates of Yamaku, Katawa Shoujo truly begins. Despair is a truly terrible feeling. A feeling that only occurs in the absence of hope and a sense that things are never going to improve. It's hard for me not to empathize with Hisao. The reader takes his perspective throughout the entire visual novel, and while I admit that Hisao is a character that is easy to dislike at times, for example, his attitude in the prologue reminds me of the me I used to be, and sometimes still fall into at times. I don't dislike or hate him as much as some other readers do, because I'm able to step into his shoes and feel the emotions he does on a personal level. I find that the ability to empathize with any protagonist is often the prerequisite for elevation. And even if a reader didn't like Hisao, I imagine everyone in their life has felt it at some point. The bitter feeling of being left behind while the rest of the world moves forward. Hisao knows he's being left behind, but he feels there is nothing he can do to catch up. Back when I was in high school, there was a classmate of mine who was diagnosed with cancer. He was taken out from school, and do you know what the worst part about that memory is for me? Our daily lives went on as if he never existed. Granted, I wasn't a close friend of his, but I know so many of us forgot about him, myself included. I imagine he felt much like Hisao did, lying in a hospital room while staring at a sterile ceiling, wishing that he could do all the basic things that we take for granted. I have little doubt he too felt the chilling grasp of despair during his days in the hospital. When Katawa Shoujo truly begins, Hisao is in a state of despair. This despair continues throughout much of Act 1. He feels isolated, abandoned, openly depressed, and is disgusted with himself and his newfound life within the school. It is an entirely new environment for both him and the reader, and he deals with something that many of us fail to consider on a daily basis. Because Yamaku is a school for students with disabilities, he sees people's problems directly. For example, he meets other students that are deaf, blind, scarred, or missing a limb. Of course, he later learns that much like his physical disability, there are mental struggles as well. Initially, he considers it ironic. One would think that fitting into a place would be easy, especially in a place for misfits. He exemplifies one of my own biggest fears: isolation. In my experiences, isolation often is a starting point that leads to despair. I may be an introvert, but being isolated and wanting to be alone are two different things. Thankfully, that's not the way it has to go for Hisao. As I have previously mentioned, there are 5 routes in the game itself, each complete with at least 2 endings, and certainly plenty to think about and reflect on through a myriad of choices that you as Hisao get to make, culminating in the pursuit of the girl that Hisao, and by extension the reader, finds the most attractive. Shizune, who is deaf and mute. Lily, who is blind. Emi, who is missing her legs. Hanako, who is the victim of a tragic burn incident. And Rin, who is missing her arms. While I don't want to spoil any of the routes in this video, nor discuss them on a significant analytical level, there are particular lessons I learned that still, to this day, invoke that feeling of elevation in me. Some of the routes use a routine formula that is apparent in many visual novels, anime, and media. Some of them feature unusual routes that focus on turning traditional norms in romance on its head to say something profound. Thus, even if a reader didn't fall in love with all 5 routes, there was always at least one route that they would resonate with, the one that would give them that sense of elevation. Hence why Katawa Shoujo holds a special place in so many people's hearts. I mentioned earlier that I didn't play Katawa Shoujo fully again until my senior year of college. Up to that point, I always wondered why I had such peaks and valleys in my overall moods. One day I could be on top of the world, the next, I'd dip into feelings of worthlessness. My parents were never personally good at handling their own emotions, and they didn't teach me how to handle mine either. They usually didn't think anything was wrong unless I was actively crying in a conversation. Some of my childhood memories are filled with tears and biting words such as, "What's wrong with you?" I'm the sort of person who feels my emotions deeply, whether good or bad. And this is extended into my mediums of entertainment as well. If I don't feel that there is some purpose or theme that I will experience and remember, I have very little interest in it. I seek 2 things in entertainment: this sense of elevation or inspiration, and the desire to experience reality deeply, and to feel that it is profound. Looking back on all the years between my first and second full playthrough, I realize how many seasons have passed since then. I read it at a very vulnerable time in my life, when I was still developing my identity amidst the maelstrom that threatened to submerge me underwater for good. It seemed like every vulnerable conversation I had resulted in frustration, a lack of understanding, and biting words. And yet, the most beautiful scenes in Katawa Shoujo begin with moments that the characters, myself, and others have experienced. In those scenes, where they firmly believe that they are broken, flawed, and unworthy of receiving love from themselves or others, that they will never be enough, that they deserve every ounce of criticism and disgust that is going to be thrown their way. And yet, when they show unspeakable vulnerability, felt the full weight of their sins and shame, or perhaps asked for condemnation because they believed so strongly that they didn't even deserve to live, the character receiving those vulnerabilities lifts them up, and offers them love. Not condemnation. Reassurance. Not criticism. Acceptance. Not rejection. The willingness to say, "I'm still here." Frankly, the feeling after baring your soul to another and being supported despite the ugliness is indescribable. Save Kamamuta. Elevation. Katawa Shoujo, a visual novel born out of an idea posted on 4chan, changed the trajectory of my life, as absurd a statement as that sounds. To push myself to be better today than I was yesterday. To drag myself and others out of the pit of self-hate. Then, and now. To be grateful for the things that I have. Above all else, Katawa Shoujo taught me that empathy wasn't a flaw. That to be me, I could embrace my empathy, and that it wasn't a terrible, sinful thing. that there wasn't anything wrong with me. That there were people out in the world seeking the same sense of connection that I was. That there were people looking for someone to lift them up, just like me. That there were people who wanted to be understood and loved despite their disabilities, flaws, and problems. That no matter how encroaching the darkness seemed, no matter how much I would curse my weaknesses and deride my flaws, no matter if I wasn't understood, I came to realize more than anything else, it's all right to be me after all. I want to end this video with a fairly popular anonymous quote about Katawa Shoujo. So it's actually not about seducing and nailing disabled girls. The girls happen to have disabilities, but the more you get to know them, the more you come to realize that they are girls just like any other. They are humans with hopes and dreams, and messy, effed up insecurities about being alive and happy. They are not strange people. They are regular, ordinary human beings who feel the way they feel, not because they are disabled, but because they are ordinary. They are the universal allegory for humanity, the archetypical human, the mess you become when you feel sad and alone and unworthy. They are the girl next door, the prom queen, the bookworm, the tomboy, and all the baggage that comes with that. Nothing more or less. They resonate with you because you recognize your flaws and needs and desires and triumphs and victories, and those of the loved ones you know and care about. You want to make them happy, because you want them to be happy, because you know them and are them, and in some way you believe everyone you love deserves to be happy. You are not alone, and you are not strange. You are you, and everyone has damage. Be the better person. Hello everyone, Echoes here. I've been thinking and working on this video for quite a while now, and in the season of gratitude, I thought now would be an appropriate time. This channel is extremely close to 1,000 subs, which is absolutely wild for me to think about. Thank you all for your support. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, subscribe, or add it to your favorites. I hope this video reminded you of your experiences with Katawa Shoujo, or at least convinced you to try it out for yourself. I'd love to hear what your experiences were or are with Katawa Shoujo. A huge thank you to 4 Leaf Studios for developing Katawa Shoujo, and to Auric-Orange for writing one of the most beautiful essays on Katawa Shoujo I've ever read. Thanks for putting those feelings into words. If you'd like to read the essay, there will be a link in the description of this video. Have a great week, and I hope to see you all again soon.